It was a hot, sticky night, and the hum of the car engine had become a lullaby, pulling my eyelids lower with every mile. I was on a road trip, just passing through Chicago, but the weariness of the long drive forced me to pull off at a small, almost forgotten town called Sedona. The whole place seemed to be lost in time. Run-down buildings, deserted streets, and a feeling like it hadn't seen much life in years. Perfect, I thought. All I needed was a bed and a few hours of shut-eye before hitting the road again. But little did I know, that night's sleep would become a descent into something far more sinister. When I found the Sedona Country Inn, it looked like it had been plucked straight out of a horror movie, a place with stories hidden in the walls and secrets that never wanted to be found. And once I stepped inside, I realized I was about to become part of one of those stories. On a road trip, I was passing through Chicago when I started to get sleepy while driving, so I stopped in a little town called Sedona. I looked for a hotel or motel and found a place called the Sedona Country Inn. It looked a little run down, but honestly, so did the whole town. Plus, I just needed a night's sleep, nothing fancy. So, I parked in the parking lot and went to the small front office, which was at the front corner of one of the two buildings leading to the motel. There was an old man sitting there, reading the newspaper. It was very hot in the room, and there was a loud humming sound from the desk fan. I asked for a room, and the man finally looked up from the newspaper, without saying hello, and said, $70. I assumed he meant $70, so I gave him my credit card. I asked if the corner room was available, and he just said, no. Obviously, customer service was not included in the price. The man handed me an old-fashioned key on a blank key ring. They still didn't use key cards there. I walked across the parking lot to my room, but the door was really hard to open. I had to turn the key several times before it finally clicked and I could get in. I looked around the parking lot. There were only 2 other cars, making it feel like a ghost town. I walked into my room, and it smelled like a mixture of cotton and vomit. I wondered if I should go back and ask for another room, but looking at the place, I realized all the rooms probably smelled the same. The room was small and had a dirty blue carpet that looked old, a small couch, a coffee table, and a bed. I closed the door and tried to lock it, but had trouble doing so. After about 30 seconds of shaking the key and almost bursting a blood vessel trying to lock it, I finally gave up. Even though the door wasn't completely locked, as long as it wouldn't open, that was all that mattered, I thought. I crawled into bed, and I heard all the old springs creaking as my weight pressed into the mattress and bed frame. I tried to turn on the TV, but of course, the remote didn't work, so I just crawled under the covers and tried to go to sleep. Then it happened. I nearly jumped out of my skin when there was a loud noise at the window. I looked and saw a guy standing outside. He started talking, sounding very hurt and in need of help. He said, "Hey, please let me in. I'm hurt badly, I need help." He must have seen me in bed. I yelled back to go to the reception, but he didn't stop. There was no way I was opening that door. I had a feeling he was acting, and this was a trap. Eventually, after ignoring him long enough, he left. I turned to check and confirm, and he was gone. I hadn't realized how truly unsafe this area was. I got up to check the lock on the door to be safe, and make sure it wouldn't open. I gave the door a couple of good pulls, and it didn't open. I then closed the curtains in front of the 2 windows so he couldn't come back and look in at me again. That shook me up a bit, but my nerves calmed within half an hour, and I was able to fall into a light sleep. Not too long after, I started having this weird dream where I was in a closed supermarket, running from the manager who was chasing me, and at some point during the dream, these clicking sounds started taking over, to the point that my whole dream shifted to incorporate the sounds. And then, suddenly, I was awake. The room was cold for some reason, and when I looked down, I realized the blanket had been pulled off of me. I sat up to pull it back over, but then I saw, at the foot of the bed, a tall figure looming over me. Before I could scream, he whispered, "Shoo," and told me not to move. He assured me he wouldn't hurt me if I didn't make any movements or sounds. Then he asked where my wallet was. I told him it was in my jeans pocket on the floor. All I could see was this figure towering over me as he moved away from the foot of the bed to my jeans on the floor. I heard him rummaging through the jeans, digging through the pocket until he found the wallet. He then asked if I had anything else. I explained that I was just taking a road trip, With that, he didn't say another word and left. As soon as he was gone, I ran to try and relock the door, facing the same trouble as before. I then called the police, but they were of no immediate assistance. We went to the guy at the front desk, who played back the video footage. However, the person who entered my room was wearing a face mask and hat, hiding all his features. I got my money back and left. Thankfully, I didn't have much cash in my wallet. I canceled all my cards and ended up sleeping in my car. I learned my lesson: never stop at a sketchy motel. Early last year, my father and I traveled to do some charity work in a small town that had been flooded from recent rainfall. We had gathered a truckload full of donated clothes and items to help families get back on their feet. The first night, we stayed in a hotel that had a perfect view of the ocean. That night, my dad and I stayed up watching the Blair Witch Project on my laptop, using the hotel's free Wi-Fi. Let's just say, I didn't get much sleep. The next night, my mom had booked us a room at a motel, as we didn't expect to stay a second night. It was 100 meters away from a trailer park, and the property overlooked a large lake. The area was secluded, surrounded by trees. My mom claimed that everywhere else was fully booked, so we had no other options. We met the two managers who ran and lived at the motel. There was an old lady who was sweet and informed us about everything we needed to know, including the fact that the lake hadn't been full for 20 years. However, her husband looked like he was straight out of a serial killer movie. Him being the serial killer, he never spoke a word to us, never smiled. His wrinkles seemed to melt into his face, and he had dark rings around his eyes. That's when my dad and I started to have an uneasy feeling about the place. The rest of the day went by in a blur, so my dad and I went out for pizza and a movie afterward to avoid going back to that place for as long as possible. Once we arrived back at the motel, it was around 8 p.m., and it was completely dark at our luggage. We found a bag of children's clothes hidden underneath a spare tire. We decided to walk the bag over to the trailer park, thinking a family there might make good use of it. However, I suddenly felt a strong urge to go back to the motel, considering that we had just watched a scary movie the previous night. Coincidentally about teenagers encountering a witch in the woods, I was already on edge. We went to the front desk with the bag and asked the creepy old manager if we could leave it with him to donate to the trailer park, since they were neighbors, and we had to leave early in the morning to go back home. His eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently, saying, "No, there's no way in hell. I refuse to go there." Then, he simply walked off. My dad and I just looked at each other, as if to say, what the hell just happened? We eventually decided to drop the bag off in a charity bin once we were back home. After that, we went to our room and took showers, preparing to sleep. I specifically remember waking up at 2:17 a.m. because of my dad snoring. I stayed up reading a book on my phone, facing towards the door. That's when I heard cars speeding up and down the driveway outside. I initially dismissed it, assuming it was just some people messing around. But that assumption was shattered when I noticed a bright blue light shining through the cracks at the top and bottom of the door, accompanied by faint, indecipherable whispers coming from the other side. I was too scared to move. My body was frozen in place. My heart pounded in my throat, and my hands were shaking, literally trembling. Suddenly, the door handle started to rattle, and that's when I knew this wasn't going to end well. The blue light then vanished, leaving the room in complete and utter silence. I stayed frozen like that for another 3 minutes, though it felt like hours, before finally waking my dad to tell him everything that happened. He laughed at first, then explained that he hadn't been able to sleep earlier in the night because he heard scratching noises coming from the wall right beside our bed. I was confused and didn't believe him until he put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shoo, do you hear that?" Everything went silent until I heard brief scratching sounds coming from our bed frame. I shot out of bed and told my dad we needed to leave immediately. We left the room key on the bed and quietly sneaked out to the truck. We ended up leaving at 2:32 a.m. Never again will I ever go near that motel. Long story short, my ex-girlfriend and I had a pretty explosive relationship, and we didn't get along very often. We had gone on a weekend trip to the mountains, just to do some sightseeing and hiking because we thought it would be good for us. But things hit the fan in the hotel room on the second night, and basically, I couldn't sleep in the same room as her. Instead of getting another hotel room for around $150, I drove literally down the road to a motel, and stopped there to stay for a fraction of the price. My logic was that if I left for the night and gave her time to cool off, maybe things would be better by morning. I got a room for, I'm not lying, $50 for the night. When I was walking towards my room, the room next door was wide open. As I passed, I looked inside, and it was lit up by the blue glow of the TV screen. Though, from the angle I was at, I couldn't see what was on the screen. I didn't see anyone inside, but then again, I didn't stop to look like a weirdo. I proceeded to my room. It was a modest, normal-looking motel room for the price. Just a queen-size bed with a typical tacky floral bed cover, a TV, and a sofa. I wasn't really tired, so I just lay there with the TV on, playing games on my phone for a while. There was some weird noise that I thought was coming from the TV, so I turned it off, but the noise persisted. It wasn't the TV, so I got up, listened carefully, and realized it was coming from the room next door. I couldn't tell if it was a fighting couple, the TV from next door, or the sound of someone in distress. It was just incredibly muffled. At this point, I had nothing else to do but try to go to sleep. But then, there was a banging on the wall separating the two rooms. I got up and went closer to the wall, and it happened again. It was, without a doubt, someone on the other side pounding on it with their fist. Why were they doing this? I can't say I wasn't a little freaked out, but I felt like I had to just be a man and confront them. I went over to the next room. Surprisingly, the door to the room was still open, and the TV was still on, but there was no sound. I knocked on the open door, asking if there was a problem or if someone needed help. There was no response. I could even see that the bathroom door was open and the light was off. I stepped into the room slowly, cautiously, and when I cleared the wall blocking the view of the sofa and the bed, and still saw nobody. I just stood there, completely confused. I went closer to the TV to see what exactly was on the screen. It was just a blank blue screen. But then, I noticed a sticky note on the screen. It had writing on it. I picked it off to read it, and it said, "Check under the bed." I dropped the note and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I sprinted back to my room and made sure to double lock the door with the chain lock. Crawling into bed, I texted my girlfriend, telling her what had just happened and how I was freaking out. She called me immediately, and as I was explaining everything over the phone, more bangs started coming from the motel room wall. She heard it clearly through the speakerphone. I started to panic, and she told me to either run to my car or to the front desk. I chose to run to the front desk, hoping to get my money back. I told the guy at the front desk that he should go to the room next to mine and kick the person out, but he just looked at me and calmly said that there was no one staying in the rooms on either side of mine. He seemed to know immediately that both rooms were vacant. I insisted that he check it out and demanded a refund. He reluctantly agreed to go with me, holding a key to the room in his hand. When he unlocked the door, the TV was now off, and the room was dark. He walked inside and even checked under the bed, just like the note had said. To my surprise, even the sticky note I had dropped on the floor was gone. He refused to refund me, but at that point, I didn't care. It was only $50. I left, went back to the hotel where my girlfriend was staying, and was so relieved to hug her and sleep in the same bed. To this day, I don't know what I witnessed in that motel room. I don't know who or what was under that bed, and frankly, I don't want to know. And so, as I closed my eyes that night, I knew one thing for certain. I was grateful. Grateful to be in the arms of someone who loved me. Grateful for the lesson that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. And grateful that sometimes, the best ending is the one where you choose to leave the darkness behind and step back into the light.